everyone, welcome to PNU Talks. I am Patriluz Manongsong, but you can just call me Patty, and I am your learning from home buddy for this episode entitled Sa True Lang, Distinguishing Real from Fake News. I'm an alumna of PNU. I graduated in 2015 with a degree in Bachelor of Secondary Education, major in English. I was also part of the PNU Debate Society. Currently, I am teaching at Merriam College Middle School and taking my master's at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Our topic for today is definitely not new to you. In fact, everybody can claim that they have already heard the term fake news. Who wouldn't have heard of the term when we talk about it every day, right? Fake news is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So maybe you're asking, so why do we have to talk about it now? It's just so exhausting to hear of the term fake news. In fact, according to Google Trends map, in 2016, in the second half of 2016, people started searching extensively about the term. But the question is this: if fake news were a person and it stands right in front of us, well groomed into making us believe that it's telling us the truth, the question is, do we have the capacity to actually detect the lies despite the very good grooming? So I only have two goals for today. Number one is the more obvious goal, to equip you with tools, concepts, ideas that can help us battle fake news. Secondly, and I think more importantly, the goal of this very short sharing is to awaken the sense of willingness in us. Because everything that I'm going to share with you will be put into vain if in the first place we are not willing to do it. So at the end of the day, what I'd really like you to take away from this talk is that we realize that we can take part in actually breaking the cycle of circulating information, materials, and whatnot that are not credible. And that, as productive and responsible citizens of society, we have the accountability, the sense of accountability, and also the power to verify information before sharing it, before allowing other people to believe in what we have shared. In this time of pandemic, disinformation can actually kill. Disinformation can ruin relationships. And disinformation can cost us our rights and our peace. So today, those are my two goals. And I'd like to introduce you to the main source of my talk. At the end of the talk, I will flash all my resources, my sources, so that you can also check for yourselves, because you wouldn't know if I'm telling you the truth if you don't verify, right? Because you know what, CTTO is never enough, okay? So today I'd like to introduce you to the main source of the talk, and that is the book published by UNESCO in 2018. It's entitled Journalism, Fake News, and Disinformation. It's actually a journalism education training handbook, which is part of UNESCO series in journalism education. Okay, let's begin the part one of our session today, which is about the information disorders. Why is fake news problematic? According to the book that I just cited earlier, when we talk about news, it's tantamount to verifiable information for public interest, right? And anything that doesn't reach that standard shouldn't be given the label news. So today, instead of actually using the term fake news, let's use the terms misinformation and disinformation. According to Wardle and Direction 2018, fake news is actually a combination of two concepts: misinformation and disinformation. So what's the difference between the two concepts? When we say misinformation, it's false information, but the person who's circulating it believes that it is true. What are examples? Examples, we see a post on Facebook, right? Or any social media platform for that matter, and we think that this is something that's credible. So we believe in it, right? So person X believes in that content. Person X shares it, thereby misinforming other people. Secondly is disinformation. When we talk about disinformation, the one who disseminates the information actually knows that it is false. It's a deliberate act of distributing false content. So what are examples of this? Trolls. Paid individuals who are, whose jobs is to create false content. There's also a third category which we call malinformation. When we say malinformation, the information is actually true. It's genuine. Okay, it's true information. However, it's circulated with the intention to harm a certain person or a group of people. Example, if an information is circulated because without justifiable public interest. And since we're done talking about the differences among misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, it's about time to talk about the different categories or sources of misinformation and disinformation. According to the Rakshan and Wardle, there are actually 7 sources of misinformation and disinformation. First is satire and parody. Maybe a lot of you are asking, why do we have to include satire and parody as a source of misinformation when they're actually considered art, right? According to the Rakshan and Wardle, while that is true, there are some people who do not treat these satirical sites as satire but as truth or sources of facts or pieces of evidence. Secondly is what we call misleading content. When we say misleading content, this is associated to the idea of framing theory, okay? So basically, misleading content is when you cherry pick information in order to frame an individual or frame an issue. Example, you just choose certain statistics or crop out a picture or basically a portion of information in order to frame something. What's an example of this? I'd like you to look at the verifiles example, right? According to verifiles, this is something that is misleading because this is without considering the testing capacities or testing done in these 2 countries. Okay. Third one is what we call false context. Okay, what do we mean by false context? Basically, this is actually true information. Okay, it's genuine information that's taken out of its original context. How is that so, right? During the Australian bushfire, there were a lot of images circulated online, recirculated actually. One example of this is this very graphic image of a tiger burning. It's claimed that it's one of those animals which died in the fire, right? But actually, this is a recirculated image of a taxidermied tiger, which was burned by Indonesian authorities in their efforts to crack down wildlife smuggling. Okay, the next one is what we call imposter content. When we say imposter content, basically, it makes use of credible sources in order to make the material more appealing to the viewers or to the readers. Examples of this would be names of journalists used in a certain article which they did not write, or logos of news sites which are used in example images. An example of imposter content is this one. First, President Duterte did not say this about his supporters, and secondly, News.5 did not publish this. In fact, as you can see, there's the original post and there's the manipulated post. Third one, which became very popular also, was the quote from Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth did not say this. The next one is manipulated content. When we say manipulated content, it is when genuine information is manipulated in order to inflict harm to a certain person or group of individuals. One classic example would be a picture, right? Maybe you have there's a picture that's really taken and it really involved a certain individual and it's manipulated. Example, settings changed, or it's added to another picture, it's manipulated and edited in order to harm that person. Next is what we call false connection. It is when the headline or the visuals or the captions do not match the content of the article. Classic examples of this would be clickbaits. And the problem begins when the readers refuse to read the content of the article and just rely on the headline or the visuals or the captions provided. The last one is what we call fabricated content. When we say fabricated content, it's basically 100% false. Okay, what are examples of this? News sites that are created in order to deceive people. Some of them even mimic the appearance of news sites that are credible, so that people, when they wait for credible sites, they will also appear as one of the options. And if you're not very conscious or cautious of the appearance of the actual or legitimate news site, you may fall into the trap of actually believing that the news site that you're looking at is credible and that is the real one. Okay, so we're done talking about the different categories of misinformation and disinformation. At this point, we're going to talk about the different elements of information disorder according to Direction and Wardle. So they identified three. Number one is the agent, number two is the message, and number three, the interpreter. When we talk about the agent, we're not just talking, according to them, we're not just talking about the one who actually created the material. We talk about different agents involved in the cycle. Example, according to them, the agent who created the material may be different from the agent who published it, may be different from the person who actually circulates it or recirculates it in different platforms. So therefore, we're talking about different agents with different motivations. Also, according to them, it's important for us to talk about the message. What are the varying messages of these materials? Because in doing so, in knowing and understanding the different messages coming from different agents, we would see the gravity of the situation. And finally, what's the interpretation? What's the evaluation of the message given? Aside from the elements of information disorder, Wardle and Direction also identified 4 phases of information disorder. Number one is what you call creation. Creation is a stage when an unidentified person conceives of the material. Okay. The second phase is what we call production. When we say production, this is the time when the false information or false material is already published. And where is it published? In strategic sites, right? The ones that I mentioned to you, the fabricated content, the sites that are really created in order to deceive individuals. The third phase is what you call distribution. When we say distribution, this is the time when certain individuals, again, different agents. That's why I told you earlier that the agent who created may not be the agent who published and may not be the agent who actually distributed. This is where trolls would come in, right? So these are different individuals who would be sharing the content in different social media platforms or different platforms for that matter. And the last one is what we call reproduction. And to me, that's the most alarming. Why is it the most alarming? Because if we are not careful enough, we may be one of the agents of reproduction. Because this is when, remember, distribution ends with paid individuals sharing it in different platforms already. Okay? Reproduction happens when other people who are not involved in the system, initially not involved in the system, would reproduce it by sharing it in their own social media accounts. Now that we're done talking about information disorder, it's about time for us to move to the second part of the talk, which is about fact-checking. So the first question is, what is fact-checking, right? So of course, fact-checking relies on information from experts, academe, or government agencies. It leads to an adjudicated conclusion about the veracity of a certain claim. So simply put, when we talk about fact-checking and we do fact-checking, our purpose is to check the truthfulness of a certain material or a certain claim. Manzarlis identified 3 phases of fact-checking. So the first step is finding the fact-checkable claims. It is important for us to remember that not everything can be fact-checked. Example, jokes, satire, hyperbole, or opinions. You cannot fact-check the truthfulness of these things. However, there are things that we can and we should fact-check. And these are the things that we have to identify first before we proceed to finding the facts. So when we find the facts, what are the things that we have to take into consideration, okay? Part of finding the facts is actually looking at sources or evidence that are related to the claim. So Manzarlis also identified different parameters when you consider different sources. Number 1 is proximity. When we talk about proximity, we're talking about how close is the evidence to the phenomenon. Next is what we call expertise, okay? So when you look at the source and you're trying to find facts, please make sure that the source was created or written by somebody who's expert in the field. So when we talk about rigor, the question that should be answered is, how was the evidence collected? The fourth one is what we call transparency. It answers the question, what do you know about the evidence? So example, a scientific study that includes all the other bases for that certain conclusion. Next one is what we call reliability. Is there a track record? And lastly is conflict of interest. Maybe how is the private or personal interest of the source served by the evidence as it is. Third phase is what we call correcting the record. So once you're done finding the fact-checkable claims and also finding the facts, the last step is actually correcting the record. When we say correcting the record, basically it's just evaluating the claim in light of the evidence that you have gathered. So here's an example of how you can the truthfulness of a claim based on evidence. This is an example by PolitiFact. So artists also listed some very helpful sites in terms of fact-checking. Example would be Pointer, International Fact-Checking Network, PolitiFact, AfricaCheck, but also I think the more popular to us would be VeriFiles and FactCheck Philippines. So now we proceed to the third and last part of the talk, which is about social media verification, assessing sources and visual content. Trevor and Bell actually enumerated questions that we have to ask ourselves in order to unveil certain red flags in social media content. The module also enumerates different basic tools and techniques which we can use in order to verify content, one of which is Facebook account analysis. There is a tool called Intel Techniques which we can use to learn more about a source through Facebook account analysis. However, I just checked the site, it's no longer for free. The second one though is what we call Twitter account analysis. In Twitter account analysis, you can use the guide from AfricaCheck. It's a site that I mentioned to you earlier, so that you will learn more about the source by looking at or analyzing its social history and thereby knowing whether it is bot tweeting. The third one is what we call reverse image search. Okay, there are different tools like Google reverse image search or TinEye, which you can use in order for you to know whether the image has already been recycled. The fourth one is what we call YouTube data viewer. There are sites like this which can help you learn about the thumbnail of a video, and through learning the thumbnail through the reverse image search, you can also know whether the video has already been published in an earlier date. The next and the last one is what we call the EXIF data. It's actually a metadata attached to visual content. Unfortunately, some images do not reveal the data. So in that case, we can also use image forensics, which can reveal to you whether there are inconsistencies in metadata, which can suggest manipulation. So this concludes my sharing for today. So what have I given you in this talk? Number one, we talked about information disorder and how fake news as a term is insufficient. That's why I introduced you to other terms like misinformation and disinformation. Second, we talked about fact-checking 101. And third, we talked about social media verification, how we can verify sources and visual content online. So hopefully, we have realized how much responsibility we have in order to forward truth in our society, especially in this very crucial time. As what Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan said, everyone is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. If we're gonna fight for something, we make sure that we fight for it with truth, never with lies. Muli, ito po ay bahagi ng PNU Talks ng ating inang pamantasan, kung saan ang pagkatuto ay walang hangganan. So this has been Patriluz Manongsong, your Learning from Home buddy for this episode.